Can see we are on. My name is Brian Derito. I lead projects and membership at ASEC, and this is part of a continuation of the Global Entrepreneurship Support Standards Program that we ran a week, but one, with Vilgro Africa. And after getting to understand the needs and the gaps within entrepreneur support organization, we found it fit to include this as part of the continuation, even before we get into the coaching. We want to get to build the capacity of entrepreneur support organization in terms of how they can measure their impact, how they can communicate about their impact, and how they can present it to different stakeholders. This includes development partners, other ESOs, government, as well as their customers. It's more of communicating what are you doing in the space that you are at. And this, of course, helps attract funding, allows you to get investments from different entities. And today, to lead this session, is Heather from William Davidson Institute, from the Michigan, sorry about that, the University of Michigan. And I want to introduce Stacy, or any team member from Vilgro, who will also now welcome the team with Heather. Amadi, I believe that's you.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. And yeah, so for those who we are speaking to for the first time, my name is Amadi Groman, and there is my colleague with me, Stacy. We're from Vilgro Africa. And just to give a brief background, Vilgro Africa is an impact investor and an incubator. We have footprint in more than 30 countries in the continent, Africa. Currently, we've been in operations for about 9 years. We just celebrated our 10th year the other day, so it's 10 years rather. We've invested about 4 million, and that has attracted a follow-on funding of about 30 plus million for the startups that we've supported. And with that brief background, allow me invite Heather and Rajat for a quick introduction before Heather kicks us off with the presentation. But for the rest of the team, Brian, I believe they can then mention the organizations they are from and maybe their names in the chat as a way of introduction to save on time. So over to you, Rajat and Heather.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you so much, Brad and Amadi. We are so delighted to be here. My colleague Raja is already helping with the chat, and we, as Amadi mentioned, we'd love for everyone to introduce themselves so we get a sense of who's in the room. So I'll let Raja really quick say hello, and then I'll kick us off.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. Wonderful to be here, and thank you so much for joining us today. Rajat Chapa, I lead the Innovations and Partnerships portfolio here at William Davidson Institute. And I'm looking forward to your questions and interactions today. Heather, back to you.
Great. Thank you. So I lead our performance measurement and impact work here at the William Davidson Institute at the University of Michigan. For those of you that are not familiar, WDI is dedicated to unlocking the power of business in emerging markets to tackle critical global challenges and drive inclusive economic growth. As a solutions-driven nonprofit affiliated with the University of Michigan, we've been working at the intersection of entrepreneurship and education and impact for 30 plus years. I'm really excited to be here today. The best part of my job is working with leading innovators such as yourselves and helping you use data to improve your impact and the impact of those that you work with, such as the entrepreneurs and enterprises. I'm also really looking forward to this masterclass because of the peer-to-peer learning that will occur today and then hopefully continues after the session through some suggested actions we have, because we are all trying to work to strengthen the innovation ecosystem support of growing and scaling enterprises. So with that being said, it's my hope that throughout the masterclass, attendees share helpful resources they've used as a part of their impact measurement journeys. And you may notice with the title slide, I've added the word management to the focus of this masterclass because fundamentally collecting impact data does you little good unless you have a plan for how you will utilize that data and manage your ESO. And when I say ESO, I'm referring to Entrepreneur Support Organization. So I like to start with this quote from James Vincent's book, Beyond Measure, as it helps us zoom out to think about the fundamental purpose of measurement before we jump into so many of the details we're going to talk about today about impact measurement journeys for ESOs. So I'll read it aloud. For measurement, like speech and play, is a cornerstone of cognition. It encourages us to pay attention to the boundaries of the world, to notice where the line ends and the scales tip. It requires that we compare one portion of reality to another and describe the differences, creating a scaffold of knowledge. If we could not measure, we could not observe the world around us, could not experiment and learn. Measurement allows us to record the past and by doing so, uncover patterns that help predict the future. And finally, it's a tool of social cohesion and control, allowing us to coordinate individual effort into something greater than the sum of its parts. And that last sentence is really what I love about measurement, because if we're able to speak in the same language of using standard metrics, in some cases, then we can come together and do something greater than the sum of ourselves. So before the masterclass, we sent out a survey and we had 8 respondents, but I'm seeing on the call, or for this masterclass, we have more than 8 respondents. So we're going to ask those on the call that did not complete the survey to answer a simple version of the question in the chat. So please respond in the chat with the top reason your ESO collects data. Is it adapting and improving programming and/or your ESO strategy? Is it to demonstrate impact of your ESO to funder and investors? Excuse me, is it to market your program to potential customers and entrepreneurs? Or if other, could you explain? We'll give you a moment to kind of pop things into the chat. So for this question, we're maybe just copy and paste one of the bullets that Rajat put in. Adapt and improve programming, measure progress, improve and communicate impact to stakeholders. Great. Okay, 1 and 2 I'm seeing from Karen. Very helpful. While more of those come in, I'm going to also click to show you what the results from the survey were. As I said, we had 8 responses, so it's not really a huge sample, but it gives you an indication. And what you're going to see is the question that we asked in the survey is a little bit different because we asked people to rank the options by priority of those 4 responses. And the results showed that the top response for measurement by ESOs that responded was to adapt and improve their programming and/or their ESO strategy. And the second highest reason was to demonstrate their impact to funders and investors. And I find it encouraging that the highest reason selected was adapt and improve programming and/or our ESO strategy. In my mind, it's not an either-or strategy. In fact, I think if you focus on adapting and improving your programming and your strategy, the other ones naturally come. So doing this, if you really put out as the main goal of your measurement strategy to adapt your programming and your ESO strategy, then it puts you in the driver's seat of what data you collect and ensures you focus on data that's useful to you. And I believe strongly in helping empower organizations to really think about what makes the most sense for them to measure for their own improvement purposes and to drive their strategy. And so throughout this presentation, you'll see a lot of ways that you can do that and kind of have those tougher conversations when there's a mismatch between a funder and your organization about what to collect. I have another survey question for you, and then we'll get into some content. Impact measurement and management isn't rocket science, but it's also not easy peasy either. So if you didn't take the survey before the masterclass, could you please share in the chat what the biggest measurement challenges your ESO faces? Think about what keeps you up at night. What's like that annoying pain in your side of something related to measurement that you have to do, or you feel like you have to do, or you're not sure why you're doing it. Lack of robust tool to support, collecting data from startups. Okay, this is helpful. Yes, this is a very safe space, as Rajat said. We want to just hear, and this is our moment to also get a pulse on how things have changed. I've been doing this measurement work since 2008, and it's been very interesting to see how the challenges in measurement have evolved and which ones stick and have stayed. So I'm very curious to hear from you. Well, while more come in the chat, and maybe you'll be inspired by what we have on this slide, I will click
Yeah,
through.
there is an interesting point here, Heather, around consistency of data collection. You know, that's a challenge, and I think that's very important because often we are driven by fundings and resources. So we may be doing a good job on one program versus another, but we may not be able to collect everything that we.
Yes, it is so true. And that's why I really like trying to create your own measurement strategy as an organization so that then you can have consistent metrics across your portfolio of companies you work with or across your projects. I know we have different types of players in the room today, and most of my language I'll use is speaking to ESOs, but I'm going to try to what I'm going to walk you through today is something that can be done at any type of organization. And the goal is if you know exactly what you want to measure and how that helps show your North Star for improving your own programming at an organization and your strategy, then you can have consistent metrics. They may be few across the entire organization, and then you can go into more details in relevant projects as needed. But really owning and empowering yourselves to have your own measurement strategy and not have your funder or investor in the driver's seat always and telling you what to measure, I think is critical for that to occur. So on this slide, you can see what some of your colleagues had put in the survey. We see challenges about getting accurate data from entrepreneurs. I also saw that in the chat. Comprehensive MEL plans and so not only about consistency, but like having a comprehensive plan that works across the entire organization or across everything you're doing. Assessing certain outcomes. So there were some points in the survey about like quality or community transformation. And some of those may require different types of metrics that are harder to collect than just asking a single question or using data that already exists. Qualitative measurement came up, and then attribution as well. Additional challenges to those that were highlighted in the survey that I've heard on very recent webinars with ESOs include, maybe click that through, the power dynamic of entrepreneurs versus ESOs and funders in driving what's collected. So that kind of just came up a little bit in what I said on the previous slide. A desire to assess longer term impact, and a need to have impact data to help with marketing services. So in the first question that we had shown, the top two responses or reasons for collecting data or highest priority were to help improve your own programming and your strategy. And then the second one was around proving to donors and funders what your impact is. And the third one, which is this piece on like helping with demonstrating your value to your customers so that they want to come back and they talk about you and they kind of help promote you and market you yourselves. So impact data can help with that, and I'll talk about that later today as well. So I liked talking about challenges because in a recent Pollinate Impact webinar with Triple Jump and iGravity, they shared some of their recent research, and this is ongoing research that they're doing that you can follow along. They're going to have more webinars throughout the next year, but this is on ESO system hurdles and key constraints. And the four main ESO system hurdles were the ones highlighted here that are larger font: financial sustainability, human resources, public-private collaboration, data transparency. And I took a screenshot of their findings from the webinar, and we have the webinar, we've added that into the chat in case you want to watch that later. But I added blue stars to highlight measurement-related challenges. And as you can see, measurement challenges interconnect across the system hurdles. So things related to financial sustainability have impact measurement challenges that then affect data transparency, and data transparency challenges then affect your human resources and vice versa. So there's really figuring out your impact measurement and management strategy is critical to helping reduce a lot of the other hurdles and challenges that you face as an entrepreneur support organization. One of the 4 leverage points identified in the webinar to actually unlock some of these ESO system constraints was impact measurement and learning. So I wanted to share that because indeed, establishing standardized data collection and reporting mechanisms can strengthen your credibility, improve your impact measurement accuracy, foster informed decision-making, and then ultimately enhance trust and collaboration among ESOs, enterprises, funders, and policymakers. So this is kind of the format for the masterclass today. I'm going to be taking you through 6 steps. Like I said earlier, everyone's impact measurement and management journey is different because each organization has different goals and different capabilities. That's why that's why impact measurement seems tricky, because everyone wants like the same framework to be able to use, and then they can compare to other ESOs and whatnot, but it doesn't work that way. It's since 2008, I've never seen a framework that works for every single organization. So it really comes down to what are your goals for measurement, and what capabilities do you have in-house, and how do you supplement those with support from outside? So the measurement approach that I'm going to share to you today can be adapted to any organization. And along the way, as you've seen, we're going to be sharing relevant resources in the chat with further guidance to help you implement each step. And since each organization is different and constantly evolving, it's valuable to take stock at regular intervals of areas where your organization's learning environment is strong and weak, so you can plan accordingly. So the first step here is to conduct a learning environment survey. And this first step is, I'll talk a little bit about this, it's a lot on one slide, but the many root causes of why impact measurement and management processes fail within an organization can be found within this assessment. So before you jump into starting doing your measurement, and I know all of you we're all doing measurement already, but it's good to take stock, like maybe on an annual basis with a survey of some of these areas. And so the assessment that we recommend has 3 areas. The 3 areas they reinforce each other and overlap to some degree, but it's supportive learning environment, which means that there's psychological safety to like find things that aren't working and then talk about it, appreciation of differences, openness to new ideas, and having time for reflection. We are all increasingly becoming more and more busy in our lives at work and at home. And so the time for reflection actually becomes a huge barrier often to do impact measurement and management well. So having the data to show you that that's one of your main areas that you're struggling as an organization can then make you think proactively to make time for that at regular intervals throughout the year. The second building block is having concrete learning processes and practices. So experimentation, are people open to doing that in your organization? Information collection, analysis, education and training, information transfer. So that's kind of making sure, do you have the processes in place to let you do the work? And then the third area is leadership that reinforces learning. Excuse me, this is the most common culprit for poor learning environments, because if leadership isn't reinforcing learning and creating that supportive learning environment, then it's kind of dead on arrival. And so that is really important to understand, so that then your team, if you have a MEL team, a monitoring, evaluation, learning team, or whoever's really leading the charge in impact measurement within your organization, can understand that that is probably where you need to start to be able to do some of this more holistic measurement work within your organization. So how do you assess your ESO's learning environment? We suggest that you conduct a survey focused on these 3 building blocks, which are essential for organizational learning and adaptability. And you see Rajat put in the chat the HBR article. that I'm referencing, and that has links to the questions. And then after you do that survey, like you can do it with everyone in your organization that usually helps give information for your impact measurement, or even make it a little bit broader, because you'll see later, I'm going to talk about why it's so important that everyone at your organization feels that they have some skin in the game on data collection and using data for improvement. So you do your survey. What do you do next? Okay, so then you analyze the survey results. And we suggest then further exploring some insights during 30-minute interviews with a subset of your survey sample. And in those interviews, what you can be doing is exploring potential solutions to weak areas in the learning environment, because that will help inform recommendations you give. And then lastly, then you use your survey and your key informant interview results to create recommendations on the areas where your ESO can improve its learning environment. So with that, this is the end of the first step, and I just want to pause and see if anyone has any clarifying questions on this step before we move on to some of the more meaty pieces of measurement. And if none come to mind, you can also pop them in the chat. Rajat, I said, is like really monitoring the chat, and he'll make sure to make me pause so I can answer any clarifying questions you have. Great. So then the next step is to create or update your ESO's theory of change. As you know, theories of change, you've probably heard about them. Different people do them different ways, but basically they're living documents meant to evolve and be updated as your organization grows. So put another way, I think it's really a good way to think about a theory of change is that it's a strategy map. And you got to think about what language you're using in your organization. If theory of change doesn't resonate with leadership, call it a strategy map, because that's what it is. It's showing what you're doing and how you're planning to get to where you want to be. And then that is a way and a communication tool to then talk about everything that your organization is doing. We find that theories of change are foundational tools on which the rest of your impact measurement and management journey is built. The theories of change help surface key assumptions to tests, which lead to the identification of learning questions, which we'll talk about in step 3, and then what key metrics you want to collect and attach to each piece of your theory of change, or key pieces of your theory of change. So that's step 4, which then can help you track and inform real-time adjustments during implementation, and also to report your impact to funders and customers. And like I said earlier, a theory of change is also a communication tool that lets stakeholders from various backgrounds, either internally but also externally, to quickly get on the same page and use the same language as they work together to design, implement, and adapt a program. I cannot tell you the number of times where we've used a theory of change and it's in a partnership. And it just basically, everyone then is not talking past each other. We're talking about the same things, and it forces us to get on the same page very quickly. And that's what we use to kind of make sure we understand what we're all talking about and where we're trying to head together. And I should also mention that we find it useful to have like a very detailed theory of change internally, but then we also share very high level theories of change externally that have a lot of the details removed, but kind of can just quickly show the average person coming to your website, like what are you trying to do and how are you trying to do it? So I think with that, I want to go to another survey question. So for those that did not complete the survey before the masterclass, could you please share in the chat whether your ESO has a theory of change? And if so, do you use your theory of change, or how do you use your theory of change if you have one? And if you don't have a theory of change, why don't you have one? You just don't have the time, you use something different. I'm very curious to hear what you have to say. And well, in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of click through so you can see what the survey results showed, but it showed that over half of those respondents had a theory of change. Two, a little bit less than half didn't, and one was unsure if they did. So that was really helpful. We do the survey before the presentation to kind of understand who's going to be in the room so we can make sure we tailor content to the full bandwidth of who and different skills that people have. So if you have a theory of change, we wanted to know, how do you use it? We found that the majority find them valuable that have them for communication, defining problem and goals and key focus areas, strategy and program design, as well as for impact measurement and evaluation. And then one ESO that didn't have a theory of change stated that they're more accustomed to using a log frame matrix, which is similar to a theory of change in a lot of ways, but a little bit less, it's a little bit more rigid in that it's very linear versus like being able to incorporate some complexity. But again, everyone uses the terms a little bit differently. So this person may actually have what I'm defining as a theory of change. So I wanted to back up, because some people don't have a theory of change, to kind of talk about the basic structure of one. The basic idea is to map out how you think your inputs and activities will produce outputs, which lead to outcomes, which then ultimately contribute to goals. So as you move from inputs to goals, you can imagine the degree of control your organization has reduces. Thus, you can have full control of inputs and activities, but you can't claim full control of your outputs and outcomes. That you're more likely to say you can have attribution in those areas on certain outputs and outcomes. And then when you get to some outcomes and your goals, definitely you can more talk about contribution. And that's important to think about, because that has implications for a later step, which is around data collection and how can you show contribution? How can you show attribution? And I have some slides also on like thinking about the balance of the level of rigor you want to use based on your resources to show contribution versus attribution. And in the chat, we're going to share a resource WDI developed on creating theories of change, as well as 2 Acumen Academy free courses related to theories of change. I encourage you to check them out, even if you already have a theory of change, because as I mentioned, the theory of change is a living document, which can continually evolve, and we're always learning more ourselves, and you can always improve, I believe. So one extra thing that's not a part of the theory of change, but at WDI, we recommend developing an assumptions and risk matrix. Assumptions are an external condition beyond the control of your program that must exist for like an outcome to be achieved. There are things you could believe to be true about a project in terms of the context for your service users, or the causal mechanisms in your project will be based on, or relevant enabling factors. So to create an assumptions and risk matrix, it's pretty simple. It's basically a 2x2. You are just creating so let me back up. What you're doing is like each assumption and risk that you identify, you then rate it. You rate that assumption or that risk on the likelihood of it happening with high, medium, low. And you also rate it on how severe the impact would be if the risk occurs or an assumption fails. So then when you're done, each of your assumptions and risks have a rating of high, medium, low for likelihood of occurrence, as well as severance of impact if it happens. And then you can kind of see those ones, that assumptions and risks that both have high ratings should probably then be something you include in your monitoring plans, so you can then better and more quickly identify when something's going off track and then course correct. So this is that idea of management in addition to impact measurement. Before I move on to the next step, I'm curious if you have any questions, or I'll keep going. Great. And as Rajat said, feel free to come off mute. We're a pretty intimate group, so if you have a question, hop on in and I can hear you in real time, because I keep looking between screens to see what's happening in the chat. In step 3, this is really about creating a learning agenda. And the reason this is after the theory of change is that once you have your theory of change, you've begun to outline like, what are your assumptions? Where are there some connecting arrows between maybe an activity and an output, or an output and outcome that you're like, actually, I don't know for sure if we can claim that this causes this to happen. So a learning agenda is basically just a set of questions that a program seeks to answer to address critical knowledge gaps. And answering those learning questions can help you work more effectively. The thing I like about learning agendas is like it's meant to be mainly an internal learning tool, but you can also utilize them in ways that are strategic for growing your organization and getting additional funding. Because you can share your learning agenda publicly to seek partners to collaborate on answering questions. So maybe there's a group across ASIC that are trying to answer the same questions related to key components of ESO service offerings causing certain outcomes. Then you guys could group together and then maybe find funding together or work together and kind of share your learnings. So those are two ways. And then also funders. If you have a public version of your learning agenda on your website, funders can see that. They may be attached on and want to link in and try to help answer one of those questions. So it doesn't hurt, in my opinion, to put your learning agendas public, or at least a version of them. So some really basic tips. All questions can be framed differently, but there's some key things to kind of think about when you develop your learning questions. When you do this, you don't want to ask about nice to know issues. You got to keep really focused on like what is critical for helping you operate better. So if there's any nice to know issues, kind of just table them. They can go on the back burner until maybe you have more time and resources. You don't want to ask forms of what is our theory of change. You should already have your theory of change in place before developing your learning questions. You want to also make sure that you're exploring questions that have not already been answered. So this requires sometimes doing a little bit of a lit review to see what exists, or like just talk to your colleagues at other organizations and ask if they know the answer. And if they don't, enough if you don't, then it probably hasn't been answered. And you also don't want to explore issues that can't be addressed in the time frame in which you need answers. So we're going to do an exercise in a few moments to help draft a few learning questions for your organization. So keep that in mind, because you don't want to ask something that you won't get the data in time to then help inform your internal decision making. So of course, some of these on the do side are a little bit of the flip side. You do want to seek information that can inform decisions and clearly links to programming. So again, that's why we want to do this after you have a theory of change in place that feels strong. You want to ask questions that test assumptions or explores risks. So that's why you want to have done that exercise I mentioned on the previous two slides about looking at your assumptions and risks. And you could see which ones are high and say, hey, this is actually a question we have, and we want to explore this risk further over the next year. You do want to use existing technical evidence base to inform your theory of change and programming decisions. So do your lit review before you start collecting data related to learning questions. You want to explore identified gaps in knowledge related to the development of the hypothesis that you have as an organization. And again, you want to ask questions that are answerable in a time frame that aligns with decision making. So for each learning question you develop, you should check through the following components. These are in 4 categories about like whether that particular learning question is focused, useful, feasible, inclusive. You want to ask in relation to focus, is the question clear? Is this question still answerable, or is there existing literature that answers this question? So this checklist kind of takes some of those do's and don'ts from the previous slide and puts it into like an action-oriented way to check your work. Is it useful? Will the question be answerable in a timely manner for decision making? We talked about that already. Feasible. Can this question be answered? Does the organization have the resources to answer this question? Are the benefits of answering this question outweighing the cost? So you've got to think about resources. Data collection takes time and takes money. It also takes your staff time. Inclusive. Has the question been co-developed with those answering it? So this is really important because I think often we sit in our little silos, or we stay in our own lanes of the type of stakeholder we are. It's really important to try to socialize your learning agenda with others and get other perspectives so that you ask an even better question, which is going to only help you get a better answer. And then finally, has the question been co-developed by those who will use it? So this is important to talk about here because entrepreneurs, like a lot of your questions, like your ESOs are working to serve entrepreneurs. So it's important to socialize those questions with some of your entrepreneurs that you work with so that you can make sure it's structured in the strongest way possible. So once you have your learning agenda in place, it's just a list of learning questions. I recommend having like maybe 3 or 5, and you try to answer them over a year. And then you take stock at the end of the year, and you could have quarterly meetings to kind of review progress to answering those questions and what you're finding. But and you could then the next year, maybe some of those learning questions will continue on to the next year. But it's really just meant to be a way to collect data and utilize it to inform how you're adapting your program and your strategy. So once you have your learning agenda in place, you can integrate your learning questions into existing processes to help ensure you gather relevant data. And why I'm trying to talk about this here, because data collection is coming up later as a step, is because I want you guys to think about every time you do data collection, and you guys, I know many of you already know this, is thinking about what existing processes you have in place to integrate and just add another question is useful instead of creating a whole new process that's separate to answer learning questions. So this includes,
Heather,
uh-huh.
sorry, there is a question from Wilfred in the chat.
Oh, great. Let's see.
How do you right size your impact and outcome goals to avoid setting too unreachable, ambitious goals? Also, how do you determine the attribution of the impact to your activities and inputs? Lastly, how do you mitigate unintended impact? A
Yes, these
lot in
are,
there, but
no, I appreciate the question, Wilfred. These are very good. Um, how do you right size your impact and outcome goals to avoid setting too unreachable, ambitious goals? I will get to that in a little bit, but I'll with the data collection piece and KPIs, but you'll see that a lot of recommendations are to have like 3 max indicators that you're collecting across your organization that are standardized or across your programs. So that then makes it pretty easy. It's an easier lift to have 3 key indicators. And how you come up with those, I think, and I believe, is like look at your theory of change and try to have an indicator in the top areas that you would like to see change and prove that you're having impact. And we'll talk about what some leading players are doing around that, and that could help inform maybe what type of KPIs you want to focus on. How do you determine attribution of your impact to your inputs and activities? So this will come down to your methodology that you're utilizing and your sample size, and that's something we don't have time to go into today, but you can do a lot of different studies. I'm a big believer in designing right-sized research, which we'll also get into in a little bit. And that means like you don't need an RCT, but you do need a large enough sample size and a comparison group to show attribution. Lastly, how do you mitigate unintended impact? So this is a very important question, and we're not covering it directly today. I think it's really important having very strong learning processes in place will then make sure, and especially if all your staff believe and feel strongly that they're a part of the measurement process, they will then like raise, and if they feel comfortable and there's a learning environment that's happening where everyone feels comfortable to kind of like raise their hand or like a red flag if they hear something or see something that is an unintended negative impact, then you will then get that information at the leadership level quicker to then come up with a solution. If you have a learning environment where people feel like, oh, it's just the Mel people that are collecting data, this doesn't matter to me, then you're not, that information is likely to get buried and it's not going to come up to you, to leadership so quickly. So the learning environment really matters. And then once you have that information, I guess I should back up. If you have done your risk matrix and your assumption matrix, you should probably already know what you're worried about unintended impacts happening. And so that you should have that as a part of your monitoring within a certain project or with all of your entrepreneurs. So that might add another indicator to your measurement plan. So my recommendation is like having 3 outcome level indicators that you're using to show impact, but that doesn't mean that's all you're collecting. There are sometimes some monitoring indicators that you need to collect to try to find those issues before they come up. So that could look like having regular pause and reflects with all of the staff where people are like, these are the problems we're seeing. And then you could think about, okay, let's look at our theory of change. Where would these pop up? How should we be monitoring better for them? And then the last point I'll just say is I really love Toyota's lean processes and how they have trained, like their belief is and this is the car maker, that if there's a problem on the line and a worker that's working the line sees it, they push the button, they stop the line, everyone comes running and comes and helps from leadership, and they all get in the weeds and figure out how to solve that problem. Because if it happens once, it's going to happen again. And that was an unintended negative impact that occurred. So the idea there is like what Toyota does is they make sure everyone feels empowered to like hit the button. That person isn't scared they're going to lose their job. They're like empowered to be like, hey, this happened, not sure what's going on. Let's all figure it out together. And it's a very team-oriented solution. So I hope that helps. And we'll get to some of this more in detail throughout the rest of the presentation. So I want to go through this slide really quickly, and then we're going to do an exercise. So once you have your learning questions, you can put those and integrate them into your project cycle by allowing, and that helps you then engage different partners in your learning activities. It also helps you communicate the focus of your project and what questions you're going to answer through different knowledge projects. You can also connect with others within your ESO working on similar priorities. So the nice thing about a learning question or learning agenda is you have questions that may relate to only one section of your organization, but if you integrate it into the project cycle, then everyone kind of feels like they have some ownership over the question as well. You can also, as I mentioned before, with funding, you could attach learning questions to your funding proposals, because then you show funders how learning questions will lead to deliverables or knowledge projects, including the broader learning agenda that you have. And this can sometimes let a donor just understand how serious you are about learning. I have a later slide that really shows that some funders are very much want to come on the learning journey with those that they fund. And they may see a learning question that's in your learning agenda that they're not funding right now, but they want to, or it would cause them to want to partner longer term. So I think it's a very strategic move. You can also have different learning questions with your partners. Evaluations and improvement processes are also natural places to insert those learning questions. So you're collecting data. And then learning questions are also a very valuable part of your strategic planning. So if you're kind of in your strategic planning meetings, however often those happen, if you have some of those key learning questions, maybe not all of them, those in trying to talk about answers to some of them, that can help inform your strategy as well. All right, I see a question in the chat about how do you handle scope creep at the point of measuring impact? Yes, so I am a big believer, and this will come up in the next few slides, which is about being crystal clear on what you're measuring and why you're measuring it, and having very clear and succinct questions. So that means that you are not just having a ton of learning questions, maybe you have like 3 to 5, and those are like secondary to what you're doing for your impact piece. And then you have a few maybe monitoring indicators. But any point in which someone wants to collect something additional, you have to think about how is that data going to be utilized? And that's how I handle scope creep as well. So first I have a very clear either research question, evaluation question, or learning question. So then I know why I am measuring it, but then I also think very hard about what data I need to collect to answer that question and how it will be utilized. Because I think we're human. We often find that we start a survey and we're like, hey, it'd be nice to ask this question too. But if you're not being very strong in your boundary setting on what you are collecting and why, then you will have the scope creep. And it's a journey. I think we should also realize how human we are, and it takes a while to figure this out, and we all still make some of these mistakes ourselves. So with that, I want to do a short exercise. We're going to pop in the chat And I'm going to do a new share so you can see what this is. And all right, so move this out. You should be able to see my screen, which has a Google template. And the idea here is I would like for you, even if you have a learning agenda, you can use your existing questions in your template. But if you don't, we challenge you to create like 1, 2, maybe 3 learning questions for your ESO. What this is I have a template, and then I was thinking each group, like for example, I could rename this one Vilgro, because I know a number of our Vilgro colleagues are here. I could rename this one ESIC. And then any other organizations that are here, you and your colleagues can jump in there and you can start trying to fill in learning questions. Just write them. Don't worry too much about how they're framed, but like, what are the questions that you want to know that would help you on your learning journey? And the other categories here, we won't have time to go in these, but I wanted you to have this template so you could work on it after this masterclass, which is like, what's the priority level of answering this learning question, which will help you with scope creep. Think about what part of your theory of change did that learning question map to. You can also later, not today, but think about related methods and activities to including your timeline to answer the question. Think about what resources you have, key decisions or impact that will, like, how are you using this data? So some of these things I just said in the answer to Wilfred's question. And then who are the key audiences that you want to share this information with? This is kind of related to the second to last column, but it is a little bit different. And then below, we won't have time for this today, but then you can take each learning question and then you can use that framework I had with, is the question clear? Is it unanswered? Like, is it still unanswered, etc. So with that, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to work through that, and then we'll keep moving on. Because the next step, I think a lot of you are very interested in, and it's about metrics and then data collection.
Some issue with the screen share.
All right, hold on, let me enter my full screen, I think. Does that look better, Rajat?
Yes, that's fine. Yes.
Thanks.
Sorry, how much time are we spending individually?
I had said 5 minutes. Yeah, and in the template, there's some example questions. And don't feel shy. Just write questions, like even copy a question from the template. Like, what are the key barriers for entrepreneurs to share data with our ESO? You may already know some of these, but if you have a learning question on this, then that means you're paying closer attention to it throughout the year so that you can better problem solve for that in the future. We're going to give about 2 more minutes because I want to cover a lot of other material today as well.
I'm wondering while people are actually doing it, Heather, you had also shared this example from solar system,
Mhm.
right? So maybe I'm curious that, why did you choose this one? Come of so many examples out there. If you can talk what you really liked about them, what stood
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it in depth to know if I really like it, but I wanted to show an example of Solar Sister. I think most of us are familiar with their work, and they put their learning agenda on their website. It's very clear, and then they developed a report about it. So they're sharing their learning externally. I'm sure they have learning questions that they're doing internally as well that they're not sharing with the broader scope, the broader community. But I thought it was a good example of how someone's using their learning agenda. And with that, I do see a good number of questions coming into some of these. So I'm going to pause us with the learning question exercise. And you'll see at the end of my slides that I want you to keep working on it. We can continue the conversation. But I am going to, in the interest of time, move us along.
So
Mhm.
can you share one or two examples of what you have received? And then-
Yes. Yeah, I'm not going to reshare my screen, but there's some good questions in here. I won't say which organization in case they want to keep it to themselves, but is our technical assistance really making our startups investable? So that's a really important question. And then that does attach back to your theory of change. And if you have a targeted question that's a learning one, then you are then collecting data against it. And it helps with your scope creep. It helps you stay very focused. That maybe you may have like 20 learning questions, but then you have to think about which learning questions are you going to measure this particular year. And maybe you have 1 or 3. And that may be the one you're doing, or maybe that one's the one you're going to do next year, because it feels overwhelming. There's so much data around us. And so if you know that this is the year that we're really focused on helping make our startups more investable, and we're going to do a deep dive into data to learn what's working, what's not, then you have some guardrails. Right. So this next step is on identifying key performance metrics. And this relates back to some of the questions we've had in the chat about scope, but also like which ones are most important. And I'm going to just go right to the next slide. I wanted to, in the interest of time, I'm not going to ask everyone to kind of put in the chat like what metrics that they collect, but if you can think about your top metrics, that'd be great. But on the next slide, I have key metrics that you all shared in the survey, but I first want to highlight metrics suggested by leading players in the innovation ecosystem. The first are metrics being used in a pilot of ESO, results-based financing, with triple jump and iGravity. And for those of you that aren't familiar with results-based financing, it's a payment tied to obtaining results. In this case, a funder will give an ESO a payment once they deliver certain results. And what triple jump and iGravity did was they determined 2 key areas for ESO results-based financing. And those 2 key areas that they're focused on, that they're tying money and payment to, are financial sustainability. And so the metrics they're using in this example, they're different for each ESO, are number of partnerships signed, and then percentage increase in the cost recovery ratio. So in this case, the donor really cares about that the ESO is being financially sustainable. The second area is program quality. So they care also not only that the ESO is being has financial sustainability or is on that path and showing growth in that area, but they also really care about the program quality, which makes sense. So the number of partnerships of value for startups after participating in the program is a metric. Also is the satisfaction score of program delivery. They have a third area, which I thought was interesting. Really, this pilot is focusing on those first 2 areas from my understanding, financial sustainability and program quality, but they also have a third one on technical assistance. And this is focused on improving the impact measurement and management systems as evidenced by the quality of impact report and improved tools. And the reason I wanted to show this example, and it's a pilot going on, but it shows like what funders are caring about in relation to metrics and measurement for ESOs and what type of outcomes. So if I was a ESO, I'd be like, oh, I really want to start tracking. Maybe one of my top metrics should be around my financial sustainability, and maybe one should be about program quality. And I should mention too, like this is the pilot. The way the metrics listed here came up with is that this is with one pilot. They're doing a few pilots, but the ESO for this one is Open Startup International. And in order to determine which metrics they were using, OST shared their strategy with their funder. And then they had several sessions with the funder to set reasonable and realistic KPIs and expectations that were adapted to what OST wanted to accomplish. For those that are interested in learning more, we'll put in the chat oh yeah, Rashid already did the webinar, but this also is a huge signal to me that funders are understanding that they want ESOs to be collecting data that is helping them to become more financially sustainable and have better program quality. And that there's a growing number of funders that are very interested in helping ESOs to collect what matters for their own strategy and improvement. I think we're still going to see a lot of funders that are going to push down metrics on different organizations, including ESOs, but I do want to give you hope that if you have a strong impact measurement and management process, I think you can have a conversation and get to the table and focus on the metrics that matter to you. So you're not having all this scope creep by different investors, different funders asking you for different things. And then I also wanted to share the 3 metrics Argidius recommends. And they chose these metrics for ESOs because they also are metrics that help enterprises and are non-distractive. So those 3 are revenue, employment, and investment. You guys probably know most of those. On this next slide, I'm not going to put in the chat the survey question, but I wanted to kind of show what people said are the most important indicators that their ESO collects, and I color coded these. So you can see like ones that align with Argidius are in yellow, and ones that align with this results-based financing pilot that's happening right now with ESOs are in blue. Many of you are already collecting some of the key metrics recommended by the key players in the broader innovation ecosystem, but I think it's interesting to see where they align, where they don't, and that is fine. I think what it depends on when you think about your KPIs for measuring your impact, you should really be driven by what impact you want to have occur. And so you should really probably have 1 to probably 3, I think, so that you have a little bit of triangulation, top metrics. And these are these short lists from a lot of our colleagues on the call today. And this is just a little bit of an internal reflection point on what reactions do you have to the indicators other ESOs collect, or what is recommended by some of the leading players compared to what you're collecting. Feel free to pop answers into the chat. And I can also answer any clarifying questions before we move to the next step, which is around data collection. The one thing that I found really interesting, going back to what some of the leaders are saying, is the program quality is really focused on the entrepreneur. So it makes a lot of sense to me why the funder cares about that. But the financial sustainability is a little bit of a newer metric that I'm seeing funders want. So if you don't have some kind of metric that you're collecting to showcase your financial sustainability as an ESO, I'd encourage you to think about prioritizing that. And the financial sustainability can mean so many different things. The way, again, OST came up with what metrics they're using was through conversations with the donor based on their strategy and what was realistic. It wasn't like the funder isn't saying every single ESO in this pilot has to use the same financial sustainability metrics. Rather, they're meeting the ESO where they're at and helping them in their own growth and learning journey. So if there's not clarifying questions, I'm going to move on to step 5. This one is a little bit longer because we're talking about developing your data collection plan. So before you start on step 5, you need to ensure that you have a clear sense of the questions you're attempting to answer through data collection. And so this is my point in response to Wilfred earlier too, is just like you need to have super clear and specific questions. And we'll talk about data utilization in a moment. So once you have as specific of questions as possible, we recommend drafting the sections of your final deliverable. Like maybe this is your board report. Maybe this is your impact report to a funder or an investor. So after you have your question, you can develop out what your final deliverable will look like. So you can then ensure you're not forgetting to collect any key information. And it also helps you ensure that you have a plan for how to use all the data you collect. We all fall in this trap where we collect too much data, and that only eats up resources. It's not good. So with your questions and analysis plan in mind and in hand, there's 3 key things to inform your data collection plan. 1, who should be involved in gathering the information? I've tried to make the case throughout this masterclass that the team across your organization, not just the MEL colleagues, monitoring, evaluation, learning colleagues, but the team that identified relevant learning questions and your evaluation questions are those that should decide what information to collect to get answers. Ideally, this will include your partners because you want to be on a learning journey with your partners. And ideally, you would also use a stakeholder analysis to ensure that relevant perspectives will be captured in your data collection. The second question you need to answer to inform your data collection plan is what information is needed. To answer this question, your team should identify what information is already available internally as well as externally. So we kind of talked about that when we were talking about learning questions, like look at the lit review, what's already out there. But you also have a lot of data within your organization that could already have some answers to help answer some of those learning questions. Thus, data collection plans may require collecting secondary data, such as doing that lit review first, and then doing some primary data collection where you do qualitative interviews to get a whole sense of different perspectives, and then possibly further data collection to quantify what you want to narrow in on. And the reason I often do a mixed methods approach is I don't know what I don't know. So when I start talking to different stakeholders after doing a stakeholder analysis, I may hear about some unintended impacts that are positive. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're doing that. That's great. But that doesn't happen as often. Or you might hear about the negatives, but you want to understand those. And then you're like, oh, well, then maybe I need to be collecting this impact instead of the impact that we thought about in our little siloed world, developing a theory of change. So I like opening it up with qualitative to then focus harder on the quantitative on like very key areas. The third question that should inform your data collection plans is which processes will be used and when. And it's not likely that one process will generate all the information you need. You'll probably get partial answers, partial information, or small insights from multiple processes, but by compiling existing processes you already have in place and insights, you'll generate more complete answers to your learning questions. I'm a big believer in triangulation. I'm not saying and suggesting like for rigor, you have to have triangulation, but rather a survey of an entrepreneur and getting information from them is one data point. And I like to kind of be able to back that up and validate it with other data points from other stakeholders or things that are happening in the market. It's also important at this point to consider how long it may take for the program's impact to manifest. So if one of your KPIs is around mentoring is something that you can see the results of very soon after, but like may disappear after a certain number of months after the mentoring completes. So you need to collect that data at a certain point in time to capture the impact. Whereas like doing some like technical assistance to an entrepreneur, that could continue to impact employment over the long term. So you may want to think about longer term measurement or maybe looking at employment of your entrepreneur right after you're done with the technical assistance, but then maybe 6 months later as well. So this next slide, let me get it, kind of brings a lot of these considerations of your data collection plan to mind and helps you think about balancing and scope creep. So these are really helpful to, I'll just continue and then I'll put some resources in the chat. But in developing your data collection plans, it's helpful to keep the 4 R's from MIT's DLab Lean Research Framework in mind. And these are rigorous. Can your data be trusted? Responsible. Was data collected in a way that it did no harm to the respondent or the enumerator? Is it right sized? Do you have the resources, not just financial, but also human capital, technical skills, and time? Relevant. Do you need this data? How will you utilize the findings? So as you can imagine, there's trade-offs between the different R's that you must consider when you're thinking about your data collection plan, because the rigor often comes at the cost of right-sized and et cetera. And in the chat, what we're sharing is this resource by MIT, DLab, but also a similar one called CART. And that's a principle-based framework to think about balancing and keeping focused on right sizing your measurement plans. And we're also sharing another Acumen Academy course on lean data collection. And we love to hear from you guys and learn from you. Like if there's certain frameworks that you're utilizing for data collection that you find helpful, please put those in the chat because I know your colleagues would enjoy learning from you as well. All right, so we have another survey question. Does your ESO collect quantitative and or qualitative data? So if you didn't complete the survey prior to the masterclass, please share. And in the interest of time, I'm going to click to get the results up. Oops, what happened? Okay, here it is. What we found was actually interesting to me. 100% of people collect qualitative data, but only one does not collect quantitative data. So I was expecting to see a lot more people collecting quantitative data compared to qualitative. Now I want to, before moving on to the last step in this process, I want to share 2 slides from an RIESEA report, which we'll share in the chat now as well. This slide is a screenshot from the report of an entrepreneur data collection challenges and solutions that they have a table of in this report. And if you recall, collecting data from entrepreneurs was a challenge highlighted in the survey as well as in our chat at the beginning of this masterclass. So some of the solutions that they suggest include offering non-financial incentives, providing advance notice and consistency in data collection periods, offering staff incentives, as well as taking a lean data collection approach and embedding data collection into existing services and tools. And we don't have time in the masterclass to go through each of these. That would be a whole nother topic, or masterclass, I should say. But I do want to share an example from the report, which comes from BP's. So BP's, after analyzing information it receives from entrepreneurs, they share the results with entrepreneurs, not only showing their performance, but also benchmarking how they compare to others in their cohort. And that's something WDI has done in the past, and we did recently in a project. So I think that's a really good way to show entrepreneurs how their data is being utilized so that they can use it to also improve their own operations, because that's the goal, is to help them grow and become stronger. BP's also recognizes that results become evident 2 to 3 years after the program. So they want to capture and claim some of those impacts. So what they do, and they want to show attribution, what they do is that after the program, they actively seek to encourage longer term reporting. So they set up a platform where alumni can consult experts regarding specific business problems. And what that does is it maintains a closer relationship with alumni and then helps improve response rates to surveys that are trying to capture the longer term outcomes that you don't see right at the end of a training or a cohort finishing up with your ESO. And then I also want to give you this, this resource because I think this will be good to dig into. To learn more ways to address common data collection challenges that ESOs face, in particular around getting data from entrepreneurs, I highly, I can't say it enough, encourage you to check out the L component in the report we put in the chat to look at these exemplars. They have 4 exemplars in the report, and there's page numbers. And just look at the L part, that's the learning piece. I think you'd find value in looking at the rest of it as well, because this is their scale framework, to really understand how they successfully captured entrepreneur data and for case studies showing how ESOs use data to improve their organization. And then at this point, we'll also put in the chat some additional data collection guidance from current and past WDI projects in case they're helpful for informing your own data collection plans. Because at WDI, we're big believers and we create a methodology for a certain project, and we like to share the learnings on the methods, not just the results from the project. All right, and feel free to jump in with questions. Otherwise, we're going to go to the last section, which is once you've accumulated data from the sources, then the team, including partners, work together to form answers to your monitoring, evaluation, and learning questions through sense-making exercises. And if you're not familiar, sense-making provides an opportunity to review sources of information and explore them from different angles and perspectives. The process enables the uncovering of assumptions, structures, and relationships in the data. It moves past looking at patterns in disjointed data sets or decontextualized information. And it also answers your learning questions in a way that you wouldn't if you were just trying to answer it yourself as a single individual or just your MEL team. We believe that sense-making exercises should occur as a part of your regular knowledge and learning work at different points in time. It can serve as an important feedback loop for improving your operations at the ESO level, as well as improving your strategy work. So for example, sense-making can be used by ESOs to help identify maybe why some groups are performing differently, and then finding ways to provide more targeted support. So this could involve applying a gender lens to the data. Like that means disaggregate the data to see why women are performing differently than men. Data could also be disaggregated to determine whether minorities or vulnerable populations are performing differently from other program participants. And as you dig into the data, disaggregate it, and kind of talk about it as a group, this could be just internally, but you could bring in some of those participants that represent those groups or your partners. You will then start to explore other questions you have. You may adjust a learning question, or maybe you come up with an idea of how to adapt your programming to better meet their needs, which then helps improve your finances. So how do you do sense making? Who should be involved in it? I kind of said this, but its key participants should be the individuals that collected the data. It can also be really helpful to include people who are less familiar with the topic, because then it helps you take a step back. And sense-making exercises, I should say, can vary by breadth and depth. It can last multiple years if you're trying to tackle a bigger question, and it could cover more than one question, or it could examine like a very specific theme within a single project, and you could answer that in a single meeting. Whereas more complex questions, you might want to like do quarterly meetings on it. And this could be, sense making could be done around your learning questions. Be like, oh, this is what we're seeing. Okay, you saw that, I saw this. Like, how does that jive? How does it not mesh? And that's just to have a conversation, because too often, again, we write reports based on the data, and it's like 2 or 3 people. Maybe share it with a few people for feedback within or outside of your organization, but you get a completely different answer and findings of the how and the why if you do sense making. So I really do encourage you to try out the idea of sense making. So how do you do it? It's pretty simple. It's not like a rigid process, but you just start with describing the what of the information and the what the various data sources are saying. So maybe start with like a summary statement of what the data is showing, and just do like 2 or 3 findings, maybe the outliers that you're trying to figure out why that's an outlier or what's happening. This is surprising. Let's dig into this, explore it together. Next, after you've kind of summarized what the data shows, you should have that done before the meeting. Then you explore the information in more depth and from different angles to identify patterns, gaps, and or contradictions. You disaggregate the data, and as often as possible, you try to enable triangulation. Then the third step is you then review the data again by organizing it in a different way. Like maybe you divide it into a smaller category, maybe you disaggregate it by gender. And then you want to double check your earlier insights and then call out surprising relationships to capture new insights. The sense-making process basically just gives meaning to information by inviting participants to engage rigorously with different perspectives in order to assess how your own assumptions and worldviews are shaping your interpretations. We are all extremely biased if we don't intend to be. So sense-making is a good way to kind of check your biases and call them out. It's an iterative process.
They don't, because unaona hata huyu mtu mwingine huyu wa nini right-handed, sasa lazima.
Okay, sorry. Looks like someone came off mute accidentally. Sense making is very iterative. It's a practice to be developed, but the results of a sense making exercise is to summarize your narrative developed and then kind of share that out. All right, so that's sense making. Beyond making sense of the data in step 6, you also need to have a plan for how you're going to use that collected data. And for this, we believe having a knowledge management framework is very helpful. Different knowledge products you plan to develop can be organized in an Excel sheet by these 3 categories. So often you're collecting data for accountability, improvement, or your strategy. This goes back to the beginning of our masterclass. In accountability, you're really trying to see what has been the added value of what I've done. The purpose is that you want to communicate your results. Example products here would be like an annual report, quarterly reporting, donor reports. You also have different types of knowledge products you are going to collect or create around improvement. Like what could be made better in our existing programming. And the purpose of doing that is to improve the quality and effectiveness and relevance of your work. Example products could be internal only. They could be a after action review. It could be a learning report that you have a portion that's public that's it's limited maybe, or you just keep it all internal. And then finally, the third category is strategy. How can the ESO improve the broader innovation ecosystem? And so here the purpose is twofold. You want to strategically plan and deliver evidence and apply lessons learned to meet your goals. But you also want, you're part of the ecosystem and you want to inform policies and practices in the sector, as well as attract additional funding and partners. So these could be things like in your strategy, you're thinking about your annual work plan, strategy document. This could be your learning agenda even, advocacy pieces, calls to action, small convenings. But for each of the knowledge products that you put into your Excel sheet, I would categorize them by which of these 3 buckets they relate to. And then note the format for that knowledge product, who's the primary audience, and the timeline. So then you can think about, are there certain events coming up that I could disseminate at that would be relevant? And the idea of having this knowledge management framework is to, again, how are you going to use the data and disseminate it, as well as use it internally to improve your operations? And what we recommend is reviewing this knowledge management framework on a monthly or quarterly basis. So then you're always kind of tracking on what you're putting out, what you're using internally to help you on your impact measurement and management journey. Now I'm going to move on to our closing. I'm going to again return before doing our final takeaways and then open it up to questions. I want to share 2 slides with direct screenshots from the RIESEA report shared earlier. This screenshot from the report is focused on the funder's role in enabling learning within ESOs, while the screenshot on the next slide is focused on the role ESOs have in helping enterprises in assessing their performance in their own learning journey. So you can see it says here, how can funders help ESOs provide a culture and promote a culture of learning? They can do this by helping embed MEL plans into their program structures. We talked a lot about this today. Prioritizing outcomes over outputs in your reporting requirements. So again, this is looking at longer term outcomes. This gives a hint that this is what RIESEA cares more about and they're a key player. Allow time for the ESOs to develop a program model that works. So this talks about kind of the funding structure that they think would work well. And then offer BDS providers or ESO providers feedback on their performance. And I want to, for this slide, I have a circle here. I just want to reiterate this is an empowering journey. This isn't a fairy tale that funders are changing. These recommendations from RIESEA to funders prove that. They're empowering ESOs to decide what matters to them and to take the driver's seat and what to measure to improve their operations versus funders just telling you what to collect. And Lemelson is an example of a funder who does not impose a MEL framework. You can also below there see a nice quote from Lemelson Foundation on their interest in learning with learning organizations like VilGrow. So there's funders like Argidius, Lemelson Foundation that are very interested in accompanying ESOs on their learning journey and helping you to improve. Then in this screenshot from the report, you can see that Argidius is also clear on the role ESOs have in helping enterprises collect and use data. So as an ESO, this is really relevant to you if you want to attract funding from foundations like them. And I won't, in the interest of time, to save time for sort of Q&A, I want to make sure I'll let you read this on your own time, but I think this report in whole would be very valuable to read if you haven't had a chance to check it out. So, call to action. I hope that today's masterclass inspired you and gave you the guidance on how to build performance and impact management into your program delivery. Key takeaways: ESOs can be empowered to work with investors and funders to measure what helps ESO improve by having a conversation about your standardized IMM plan and why you measure what you do. And two, to invite funders to accompany your ESO on your learning agenda, maybe through a learning agenda. And in the chat, we'll put guidance on having some of these conversations with funders on what to measure. And this comes from DLab as well at MIT. And the other takeaway is that ESOs can empower entrepreneurs to measure what matters to them in growing their business through providing them technical support on impact measurement and management, and then also aligning your ESO metrics to entrepreneur metrics so that you're not being the funder to them that is pushing down certain metrics. So there's a little bit of give and take. If your funder is being more flexible, then maybe you can be more flexible to the entrepreneurs you work with. And so with that, I wanted to just encourage you also to continue with your learning agenda that we started during the exercise today. If you want to email it to us, we're performancemeasurement@wdi.umich.edu, and that's how you can send that off to us. And let's continue this learning journey together. We'll also put our chat, our emails into the chat if you want to email Raja or I directly. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there's questions that have come into the chat.
Okay, there is one question. I think how does one balance on following the process of stakeholder engagement on the M&E planning and the deadlines or reporting on the project timelines?
Okay, that's a good question. Whoever asked that question, could you come off mute? Because I want to make sure I understand what stakeholder
Keith,
you're.
yeah.
Yeah.
Keith, can you actually come off mute and share your question?
Yes, hi everyone. Keith from Velcro. I was inquiring on the past, now the step-by-step process you've gone through right now. When preparing for a program, maybe there are certain timelines on how the program should go, and sometimes you find yourself not engaging with everyone to be able to come to a consensus on what metrics are to be tracked. How do you go about such a situation when you're not able to come to a consensus or due to the timelines on what metrics are needed or what learnings are we looking to achieve?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a number of ways to answer. I think if you have a strong measurement plan in place, it should be done before the program starts. I know we all don't have that luxury, so we often are working with what we have. But I believe strongly that measurement should be designed in the program design phase so that you are taking advantage of existing touch points and not creating extra work for yourselves and those collecting the data. So then if the MEL team is a part of the design phase of a program or a project, then you can think clearly about what the goals are and attach key measurement points to that timeline that works best for the project. Now, if you're getting put into and inserted into a process that already exists, and this often happens because entrepreneurs, you're not there from the beginning, you're coming in, and if their timeline doesn't work for you, Sometimes you need to get creative. Stakeholder engagement. Yeah, I think that's where you can get creative and you have honest conversations with the entrepreneurs or for those that you're working with. I'm just rereading your question to see if I've touched on. Maybe can you jump in if I'm getting your question right, or if there's another piece?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. I think you answering it. I think maybe on the part of entrepreneurs, maybe you can also look at on the creativity around maybe that area, how we can be able to incorporate them part of that process, because maybe they haven't been chosen yet. Maybe do we use the ones that are there already, or do we try to just like innovate on our own and then
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And what Argidius argues with those metrics that I shared that they say they had 3, they said that those are important to collect across the entrepreneurs you work with. And so that could be a way to standardize with the entrepreneurs if you're trying to work with a funder like Argidius. Argidius also recommends those 3 metrics because entrepreneurs should already be collecting them. But what I also understand from my many years of practice in this space is like when you say revenue, different entrepreneurs are measuring it slightly differently. It seems like it should be a straightforward definition, but it is a little bit different in different scenarios or investment that what counts as an investment can be measured differently. So if you're going to go the route and have standardized metrics, it should be, I would recommend using ones like Argidius recommends because they've done this also for years. And those are the 3 that they think, hey, entrepreneurs should already be collecting these and it helps them with their own growth. So if they're not collecting them, then we can help them as an ESO collect that information. So that's one way to answer your question. But also, as I have the luxury, I sit within more of a practice-based institute, and I see the challenges that entrepreneurs have. They don't have the time to collect everything that their funders want. And if you're another ESO coming in and asking for separate metrics, then they can't, we're making the entrepreneurs' lives harder. So I like to often see what the entrepreneur believes it's important to collect and then work with them to improve their ability to collect. And so that's kind of the approach that Triple Jump and iGravity are taking with results-based financing. They have 2 key areas, the financial sustainability and the program quality, that they're like, these are the 2 key areas that we want metrics in. Let's work with you based on your strategy. You can take this to the entrepreneur level and say, hey, as Phil Grow, we care about your financial sustainability and we care about your program quality or your service quality, whatever it is. And let's look at your strategy. Let's work together and come up with tailored metrics in those 2 categories that help you improve as an entrepreneur, but also then are going to be something we can report out on. And so that might mean that you're not going to be able to compare apples to apples. You might have apples and oranges within financial sustainability to report in your final report, but it will come back to what is your goal as the ESO and how you want to share out the impact you're having.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We have 2 more minutes if there's any other questions. And in the chat, I just put, we'd be interested in kind of seeing what learning questions you come up with. So if you have an updated learning agenda or you decide to work on that, please do send it to us at wgiperformancemeasurement@umich.edu. And if there's no further questions, I am happy to have you guys all start your evenings, and I hope everyone has a lovely weekend, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. And thanks so much for taking your time today with us.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, so maybe before I invite Brian to conclude for us, I know Wilfred is in the room. And maybe Wilfred, you want to say a word or 2? So Wilfred, if you're speaking, you're on mute. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but yeah. So Brian, over to you, maybe with some closing remarks before we go.
Can you hear me? All right.
Yes, Wilfred.
Thank you very much, Amadi. Apologies, I'm on still on the road. I hope there's not too much background noise. First, mine is to appreciate and thank the WDI team for making this session a success and also sharing their wealth of knowledge over the years. And also, just to thank Will Grow Africa for organizing this, also making sure that we got to interact with some of the best in the game. Also, thank you to everybody who has made time to attend this, given us their hour and a half to also come and learn and ensure that they will be able to apply these learnings. Thank you very much. And I can see Wilfred was trying to say something. Wilfred, if you still want to go, the room is open.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Nita. Thanks, Rajat. Thanks, everyone, for attending. I believe you've learned one or two things. Personally, I've learned quickly. I was actually chatting with Keith as the session was going on, trying to see what can we learn, what can we implement for what we've learned. So this has been, I hope it's been valuable for you as it has been for us. I would encourage you to go back to the Word document that was shared and continue populating it, having your learning agenda and things like that. For us, that is the next homework for Google. Otherwise, wishing you all a great weekend and a great summit for those who are attending. Thank you.
Thank you, and now we can close. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening and a good weekend as well. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.